Have you ever had a really bad day? I'm talking about the kind of day where everything goes wrong, you overreact at small things, you end up having a big tantrum at work maybe or with your family, and you just end the day thinking, I wish that I could just erase this day and start again tomorrow. We read a story here in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus, it seems like, is having a really bad day. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Now, I don't know about you, but being hungry and not getting enough sleep, those are often things that can contribute to me not being on my best form. So he's hungry, and it says, seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. So here is Jesus. He's woken up, it's early, he's hungry, and it's not like today where, you can just stop off at McDonald's or somewhere and get breakfast. So he looks into the distance and he sees this fig tree that's covered in all of these leaves. Now you might be thinking, well, that doesn't really mean anything to me because, well, number one, figs don't grow in trees as far as we're aware. They come from Tesco's or somewhere else. And number two, what does having leaves on the tree have anything to do with it? Well, you should understand that figs are a very unique fruit tree. Most trees blossom and then they bloom and then they put on leaves and then the fruits grow. But fig trees are the other way around. They actually start producing fruit, and the very last thing that they do before the fruit ripen is that they put leaves on. So if you see a fig tree in leaf, basically it's advertising, I have ripe fruit, come and get me. Now what's interesting about this is that the author remarks that actually this isn't even the season for figs. So there should be no expectation. Jesus was certainly not expecting that morning to find any figs. And so when he sees this fig tree, this one lone fig tree in the distance, he must think, wow, this is amazing. I mean, ahead of the game, ahead of all the other fig trees. Wouldn't you know it? It's just the day when I wake up and I'm hungry. I get to have a wonderful fruit-based breakfast. So he gets to the tree and he's looking forward to the fruit. I can imagine on the walk over to the tree, he's thinking about the juicy, sweet fruit, and he's thinking about how much he's going to enjoy it. And when he gets there and he parts the leaves and he pulls them apart, he discovers that while there are loads of leaves, there are absolutely no fruit. And so Jesus does something which I think is kind of unusual. Then he said to the fig tree, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples heard him say it. So he turns around and curses this fig tree and basically wishes that this fig tree would never again have anyone have the pleasure of eating fruit from it, simply because it pretended or it portrayed itself as having fruits, and when a hungry Jesus comes over, there are no fruits. So he gets to not have breakfast, and then he arrives at the temple where he was actually going, and it goes from bad to worse. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. As it is written, he taught them, is it not said, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. So he gets to the temple, right? It's as if he gets to work, the place he's trying to get to, he hasn't had a good experience for breakfast, and when he gets there, he's turning tables over, he's kicking people out, he's knocking over money, he's scattering animals, and as he's going, he's just constantly chanting this refrain, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Can you just imagine the chaos and the scene? And maybe you're reading this in your Bible, or you've heard this story before, or you're watching this right now and you're thinking, my goodness, Jesus, I mean, are you having a bad day? What's going on? Why are you so upset with some people selling in the temple? And some people have assumed, well, you know what Jesus' problem is? He's really passionate about reverencing the sanctuary, walking very softly and not moving money around. Maybe that's his big issue. And some of us have taken the lesson from that. Well, when we get to church, we have to be real quiet. We have to be real silent. We have to be real prim and proper, because otherwise big old Jesus will come in and he will stomp about and knock things over. But that's not what he says. He doesn't say, please be quiet. I'm so annoyed. I'm so upset with all this noise going on. He says something very specific. He says, my house, which is interesting for a rabbi who's just about 30 years old to refer to the temple, which has been around at least in some form for thousands of years, as his house. But he says, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Now, something that you may not understand about the temple at this time is that while the original sanctuary, the original temple that God gave to Moses in the desert had only one outer court, just one court where anybody who wanted to have access to God was supposed to be able to come, by the time of Jesus, the temple temple that they built had now three, not one, but three courts. They had what they called the court of the men. As you can imagine, this was the court for Jewish males who were circumcised, and it was the one closest to the temple and to the altar. Then they had a court outside that called, you could guess it, the court of the women, and that was for Jewish women. Not quite as good as the men, but still kind of close. And then on the very outside, they had what they called the court of the Gentiles. And here is where they had made space, at least that was the original plan, for people of all nations, so those who were not Jewish at all, to come to the temple and worship and pray. But after some time, they started to notice that they had this weird problem. At this time, they had Jews who were living not just in Jerusalem, not just in Judea, but in all of the surrounding countries. Some came from as far as Athens, and some came from Galatia, and all these other countries. And when they would come to the temple, it was really inconvenient for these Jewish men to lug, a lamb or a goat or some doves all the way from their country all the way to the temple. So some smart person said, well, why don't we just set up a small little stand in the temple where you can come and you can buy your sacrifice so that you don't have to, bring it at home. You can bring the monetary value. You can come to the temple, you can buy the animal here, and then you can go into sacrifice. And so when they were thinking about, where shall we place this center? They thought, well, not in the court of the men, obviously. That'd be far too much space and that would distract the praying. And even the court of the women, that's a bit much. Oh, I know. Let's put it in the court of the Gentiles. After all, they're only dirty Gentiles. What can they do about it anyway? And so in order to facilitate their own convenience in coming to God, they actually excluded those for whom the temple was originally designed. And this was Jesus's problem with the temple, with his people, and with the fig tree, that on the outside, they advertised like, hey, we're open for business. We're full and we're ready for you to come and for you to meet God. We have something to offer. But when you actually got close, when you actually move things apart, you discover that actually both the temple and the tree were really only there for themselves. The amazing thing about fruit trees or any kind of fruiting plant is that actually producing fruit is not in the plant's immediate best interest. When you make fruit, the fruit do not contribute to the life or the energy of the plant in that moment. In fact, they sap energy, they sap life. Leaves, on the other hand, they photosynthesize, they take in the energy from the sun and they take in carbon dioxide and they actually add to the plant. So the act of producing fruit is an act of sacrifice on the part of the plant. The only people who benefit from the fruit are the animals that eat the fruit and the next generation that are in the seeds of that fruit, which the animals or whoever may spread. And so Jesus is saying here, I am hungry for my people to produce fruit. It's interesting that as believers, we are very interested in having the gifts of the Spirit, those that make us look good, those amazing abilities to do things for God, but few of us are passionate about the fruit of the Spirit, the sacrifice, the patience, the self-control that might not necessarily get us any attention, but it can be a blessing to other people. May you be the kinds of fools who put yourself second in order to put others first. And may you discover the truth that we come to celebrate God's own fool, for only the fools can really tell. Believe the unbelievable and come be fools as well.